identified two broad trends where we can see Indian business change, the way families look at doing business, the way the corruption issue is being tackled, less out of fear, more out of the need to want to be world class. The third issue I want to bring in, and this doesn't have to do just with business, but I think it's holding up a mirror to society, so to speak, is the people protests that we're seeing across the world. So we've seen that termed as the Anna movement in India to some extent, focused mostly on corruption, but we're seeing the Occupy protests across the world. And there has to be a message that's going out to business from these protests. I'm wondering what you think that message is and how cognizant businesses are of the inequality that people are complaining about.
So I actually have a very contrarian view on this, which is, I actually think, so in fact today, this afternoon, we were looking at a survey that showed that, you know, there's a disconnect. So there's 70% of CEOs who think that they're actually doing a very good job and are actually adding social value. And then there's about 25% of whoever they were surveying as, on the market side who actually agree with that notion. So there's a disconnect between the two, which to me indicates that business actually suffers from a terrible PR problem. Okay? And I think that's it, because business actually, by virtue of creating jobs and also just creating wealth, because even if you want to redistribute something, you can't redistribute poverty, you redistribute wealth. And there's only one agent of society that creates wealth, and that's business, right? So business should actually stand up for the good it does. And I think things like CSR actually are damaging. And the reason I say that is because CSR puts you on the back foot. Because what you're doing with CSR is basically somehow indicating that your main line of business is not adding social value.
That's an interesting
Your main line
You're
of
almost
business,
trying to justify the fact that you're in profitable business,
exactly,
which is not good, so I need to do something good to balance it out.
So let's look
it's
at
like a karma balance.
Right, so let's look at a company like Microsoft, right? Why does Microsoft need to do CSR? By providing their software, they have materially improved the lives of billions of people. Why don't you just stand up on that?
I have a slight tweak to what Ruben is saying, and I completely agree with him, because when businesses create wealth, that's the way that you can eradicate a lot of the issues that you face on the social side. But businesses also need to justify the means in which they do that particular business.
Okay.
So if you are a company that's making a certain product and your supply chain is relying on kids working in a particular region to provide you with those products, that is not the right way to do business. And instead of doing a CSR activity that then checks the box saying I'm doing good,
right,
CSR is an integral part of how you do business. And if you're doing business the right way, that actually is value accretive to your own business.
Michael, how do you respond to what they're saying? Have businesses lost trust? Is that, you know, not just in India, but is that the perception that your colleagues in the Audi family across the world believe in? And how do you fix that?
I mean, you look at different industry verticals, and I think I can only speak for the automotive industry, specifically for India. I think the biggest thing we can give back to society is first create jobs where people make a good living, and where we invest in education. And that's not only people, white-collar workers, but blue-collar workers, even people working in my workshops, repairing cars. I mean, probably 20, 30 years ago, to work as a car mechanic was definitely not something which people were eager to get as a job.
Yes.
Now today, people are pretty proud to work for Audi as a, let's say, educated mechanic, work through the ranks, still have a bit of dirty hands, but deal with products you love. We give them opportunities. We have like competitions where we lift them up, celebrate their performance, and give them something back in regards of education, social acceptance, and by probably we employ 3,500, 4,000 people all over India at different ranks, but the majority of these people we employ blue-collar workers. But if they love their job, if they can grow through the ranks, improve their standard of living, and get their kids maybe one day at a university, I think then that's a very genuine contribution we can do. So we don't really want to tick a box in regards of CSR. I think for us, ticking the box is helping to develop a career in a field which yesterday wasn't a career and today is something people strive to, work through the ranks and work for a great brand and make a good living.
Sandeep, okay, we've identified 2 or 3 key trends that business has to grapple with in India. To wrap this up, what in your mind, and taking into account several aspects, the current global economic volatility that we're facing, the possibility of a decade of very slow growth, the need for India to have more equitable growth than any other country in the world simply because we have so many poor people, What do you believe will be the key challenges facing Indian business over the course of this decade? I'm not talking one quarter or one financial year.
I believe Indian businesses are in a very good place today because given where we are and given the macro that is supporting India, there are massive tailwinds that will carry us through. I mean, the entire growth that has happened in India has been, to a large extent, in spite of the support of the state or the government. And I'm very optimistic that we're going to see a good degree of policy reforms coming through, a good degree of sense prevailing, which will help businesses further grow. And if that happens, the growth that India has to offer, just given the basic story, which is structurally still exceptionally sound,
and a large market,
in a large market, is just phenomenal. So for Indian businesses, they are sitting today at a great starting point, and from here they have just a long runway. The issue for us is to make sure that we don't mess it up. And if we continue to have the issues we are currently facing, if we continue to have lack of policy reforms, or if we have policies that are actually going to make our state bankrupt by introducing some of the ones that have been talked about here, those are going to be the real issues that will sideline. We need governments to work along with businesses. Right now there's been a fissure that we are seeing between the communication of the stakeholders. So unless all the stakeholders get together and understand that we are sitting at a great starting point and the story is really there for the next couple decades still to be told, I believe Indian businesses are at a fantastic point from which we can see significant amount of growth for the next 2 decades.
Michael, you're looking in from the outside or looking out from the inside?
I think both. But I think what I would add to him is that the opportunity we have is also we have a very young nation. And the average age being 24, 25, so a lot of people are on the run and on the move with a lot of aspirations. I think what else you can ask for? They're fairly well educated, they speak in English language, so they can export their IQ and their goods and services globally. We have a lot of young graduates from university who are eager, and I think if today you tap the market of a 20 to 25-year-old to build your brand, to offer your services, and be there at the right point, I think this is the window of opportunity in India is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. If any consumer company wants to go into India, I think you better do it now. Otherwise, the train left the station and you're out of the game. So I think
otherwise, the Audi left the showroom, and you have no consumers to sell to.
We will supply some more. I think we manage that.
Ruben, last word to you on this.
Well, I mean, I agree with what Sandeep and Michael said, which is simply if you take you've got to believe the macro story of India.
Do you?
I do, absolutely. I mean, you see some of these large macro patterns as people, for instance, migrate to cities. This stuff is going to unlock enormous economic growth, okay? Enormous economic growth.
Even though cities can't cope.
But
even though states aren't even thinking about migration movements like that.
But that's precisely...
Even though there is no planning to be able to cope with these large-scale migrations.
And I'll tell you exactly why. Because the entire Indian policy establishment has been set up with the notion that urbanization is a consequence of economic growth. In fact, it's a cause of economic growth. Think of the policy response to the two. The policy response to one is, let's manage the process of urbanization, which is the current story. The other one would be, let's encourage the process of urbanization. These are two different policy responses. But if you respond to trends based on the data that you're seeing, and the macro story is incredibly sound, But going back to what Sandeep said right in the beginning, it's a marathon. Don't expect to, make your short-term buck, etc., etc. If you believe the macro story, then you've got to stay in there for a certain time.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for that dose of optimism. We in the media tend to be very pessimistic, especially over the last year and a half. So it's always nice to see 3 smiling faces when they're talking about India. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.